Rotem, it's all yours.
All right. I see myself big, so it's a little bit weird. Forgive me about that. So, hi, everyone. I want to thank everyone for joining us today and to welcome you to the Department of Arts Visiting Artist and Critique lecture series. My name is Rotem Tamir. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Art, and I'm truly honored and very excited to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Joyce J. Scott. Joyce Scott is an award-winning, multifaceted visual and performance artist, most known for her work in jewelry, beadwork, and glass. In her work, she examined the extreme of human nature by conflating humor and horror, history and fantasy, as well as beauty and brutality. Scott comes from a long line of makers with extraordinary craftsmanship skills, adept at poetry, knitting, metalwork, basketry, storytelling, and quilting. Her mother, the artist Elizabeth Telford Scott, taught Joyce to sew with beads when she was just 5 years old. Scott and her work has been the subject of countless scholarly books and articles. She is the recipient of numerous commissions, grants, awards, residencies, and prestigious honors, including from the National Endowment for the Arts, Louis Comfort Tiffany Foundation, Anonymous Was a Woman, American Craft Council, National Living Treasure Award, Smithsonian Visionary Artist Award, National Academy of Design, among others. In 2016, she was awarded the MacArthur Genius Fellowship. In 2018, Scott was awarded an honorary fellowship from NYU, as well as honorary doctorates from both MICA and the California College of the Arts. Scott's work is included in many important private and public collections, including the Baltimore Museum of Art, Brooklyn Museum of Art, National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., Detroit Institute of the Arts, Metropolitan Museum of Arts, New York, Museum of Arts and Design, New York, Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, Texas, Philadelphia Museum of Art, Yale University Art Gallery, National Museum of American Art in Washington, D.C., among countless others. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Joyce J. Scott.
Thank you. Hit it, Karen.
Okay, here we go. We're going to give you spotlight so you're on. Let's see. And I'll just follow your lead. Go ahead.
I'm not scared of dying and I don't really care. If it's peace you find and dying, well then let my time be near. If it's peace you find in dying, and if dying time is near, woo, then bundle up my coffin, cause it's cold way down there. And when I die, and when I'm gone, there'll be one child born. Ski wow. There'll be one child born left. There'll be one child born left to carry on. Oh, ooh, carry on. Slides, Karen. Hi, everybody. I'm Joyce J. Scott. I'm a member of the Scott Caldwell family who's carrying on the tradition of visual and performing arts. This is me here with my parents, Elizabeth Caldwell, Calvert Scott, and Charlie Scott Jr. This is when we were young and innocent. You know, they always blame me for the trouble. Next, my parents were from the Carolinas. These are my father's parents, Charlie Scott Sr. and Mamie Scott from Brightleaf or Durham, North Carolina. Now, I don't know a lot about the different crafts that my grandfather did. Next, but his wife, Mamie, was a quilt maker. Now, when I look at her work, I see what some people say, now that's traditional African-American art. I don't know if you can say that about any culture, any group of people, since we create in many, many different forms. But I can understand what they mean, kind of, when I look at maybe the, flying geese or the log cabin. I can hear my grandmama. I can hear her humming, but you see, she still has her own personality. She breaks up those traditional forms with color and the way she juxtaposes these shapes next to each other. Next. And then there's my grandfather, my mother's father, Samuel Caldwell. And he has many jobs. He had children. He had 14 children. So he worked on the railroad. He was a sharecropper. I forgot to say that my father's side of the family were sharecroppers in North Carolina, and they picked tobacco and crops. And my mother's side were sharecroppers in South Carolina, and they picked cotton and crops. I mean, he was a metal worker. He used to pick cotton, but not a lot because he was on the railroad. He was a musician. He ran White Lightning, and that is not the name of a group of people. That's something you drink, y'all. Don't get insulted. In fact, the story in the family was his White Lightning was so good that the night riders would let him traverse around the countryside. Now, the night riders were the Klan, the Kluxers, and they would keep people ensconced in their homes. They didn't want them having public meetings. They didn't want them roaming around. But as long as they got their hit of my grandfather's hot liquor, then he could go around and sell to other people. My grandfather was also a quilt maker. This is one of his quilts. And once again, the idea of a kind of cultural tradition, I think of kente cloth and how strips of fabrics are woven by men on very simple looms attached to your body and to the ground. Yeah. And they're moving, and they're just moving and imbuing the fabric with these own kind of personal improvisational rhythmic schemes. Now, I'm showing you this quilt of my grandma and granddad, when he wanted to dye fabric, he couldn't go to the art store. He had to wade in the water and get some yellow ochre clay and dye it. They cut up strips. And I'm showing you how tattered and torn this is, because quilts just didn't last and then they were thrown away. They were usually made from fabrics that were new. If they were new, maybe they got them from the very, very mills where they delivered their cotton to be woven. Or it was family garments or old quilts. You see that there's tatters and torns at the bottom, and that's because it's laying on top of quilt after quilt, memory page on top of each other. Sometimes they'd even use newspaper as a batten or as a stuffing. And when you take apart old quilts, there might be a newspaper in it, and that's when you find out how they were made. Next, now his wife, Mary Jane Caldwell, I'm named after her, Joyce Jane, was the one who was having 14 kids. So she was not picking a lot of cotton, but she made a lot of utilitarian quilts that people used to sleep under, not just fancy quilts. This is one of hers. See how it's torn up. My mom said I did this when she schlepped it from South Carolina. She said I tore it up. Now these quilts are important for me because I see them as diary keeping for pre-literate people. Now, people like me, been around the world, full of themselves, got these honorary doctorates. My friends who studied to get doctors always go honorary because they think it's so funny. Well, I come in, I'm hello everyone, I'm here, hello. And they say, honey, I don't care who you are. You got an aunt just like this. Her name may be Raquel, it may be Rosie, it may be, I don't know, Rosita, it might be Gretchen. Girl, come on over here right now and give me a big old hug. Come on over here. Thank you, darling. Come on, sit down. On this? Yes, sit on down. It's Uncle Benny's club. But his dad and Dawn and I, sit down. You don't know about Uncle Benny? No, I've never. Uncle Benny was a rascal. You see that print right? That's his knee print. He used to wear those pants every summer. He'd be in his Victory Garden toilet trying to get some sweet tomatoes, and he always had terrible tomatoes. You know, Uncle Benny, his daughter was a slut. You don't know Uncle Benny? So these stitches are words that become sentences and paragraphs. My mom actually said to me, You tore this up. You should put a new page on it. And that's what that folded fabric is. It's a new layer of it. And she said, if you love it, you should write on it, meaning I should stitch it. Next, my mother, the Sainted Elizabeth Caldwell Talford Scott, is a nationally known quilter, although she passed away at 95, around 11 years ago. This is the 50-year quilt. She schlepped that quilt with her wherever she went, not only as a memory piece, because she kept adding fabrics from her garments and things in the house, but also as a way of teaching me how to quilt. So I have some stitches on that too. Now, I don't know if you know about quilting in South Carolina, but when I told you my family had 14 people in that family, they were in a house that was not unsimilar to what we might consider to be slave cabins. So there was an outhouse, and maybe part of the kitchen was on the outside, so they'd have room, and they didn't have any place for a stand-up quilting frame, so they hoist, or as they say in the South, heist, a quilting frame to the ceiling and then lower it lap height, and the kids would go under and they'd make samples of quilts, and they listened to all the family stories, and they'd run the needles back up. And I'd always say, oi, I hope there weren't beans beating the night before, because can you imagine what it smelled like under that? I can't even talk about it. Next, my mother is nationally known because she's quite the improvisational person. She always taught me about attempting to understand boundaries, but not being blocked by them. So her quilts have buttons, beads, you name it, rocks, anything that she wanted to employ. They are allegorical. They talk about what she saw in the South. They talk about her dreams and memories. The piece on the left with that kind of triangular shape at the bottom is called Grandfather's Quilt. It's owned by the Delaware Museum. And there are snakes at the bottom. The story that she used to tell me was they lived in the cabin, and every year this one grandfather snake would come, boom, 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 and a knock on the door. And her father would kick it over, bam, and shoot the rifle, and there'd be nothing left but the snake skin. So they had all those Southern stories, which they wove into the work. The other piece is a prayer cloth. You place it on your back or on your tummy when you're not feeling well. People sometimes come and pray over you, or you just use it to feel better. Next. Now, my mom was quite a rascal, guys. So she imbued a lot of these pieces with fun and the magic of humor and rascality. People would bring her different pieces of fabric and ties. And so this piece is made out of bits of fabric and ties. It's very geometrically constructed. When I look at her work, I think of sheet music. Next, I think about how she has triumphed with very humble materials into making really fine work. I mean, nothing for artists who now paint quilts and use them in their artwork. It's because of the prowess. It's because of the strength of the materials and how they're put together by those magical hands. This is a quilt that's made all of neckties. And my mom said, you know, they don't have to be exact squares, rectangles, or circles, because when you sleep under it, it's going to change its shape. And if you're not alone, it's really going to change the shape a lot. Next, I told you she was a rascal. And then my parents, my mother and father, had me. They met here in Baltimore when they left the South during the Great Migration. And I mean, it was a bid for more liberty, because I wasn't joking about being ensconced in your neighborhood at night. My father was a tall, good-looking guy, and he told stories. Others told stories about how waiting for the bus or walking home, you could just be grabbed off the street by the cops. They say you're loitering, you're placed in jail without a trial, and then you're rented off to some factory or to some farm. My father worked at Bethlehem Steel. He had a lot of stories about it. So did my grandparents, my godparents, forgive me. But what I have, as Rotim said, was the passport that my mom gave me, needle and thread. Now, I went to the Maryland Institute College of Art as my undergraduate school 150 years ago. I think it was right after slavery. I went in assured that I was going to be a painter. I was disabused of that. I was told to stop painting for the betterment of myself and the entire human race. Bastards. So I went into education. I always thought I'd be a teacher, but I didn't think I'd study it in school. And hey, when I got into the education department, I was just employing all the things that my mom told me about and that she taught. So of course I learned how to weave, but I already was weaving and sewing at home. Clay, my mom has stories about how they used to make their own pottery, digging a hole, lining it with rocks, big fire, slats on the top to help dry out the clay. It's greenware. Put it in that big flame. It becomes a kind of clay that doesn't hardens, but it's, bisqueware. It doesn't really hold water well. So the ones that they wanted to hold water, guys would cover with pitch, which is a kind of tar, and they carved designs on the outside until they dried hard, and those would be used. Now that's like kind of, hands-on, everyday people artwork. Those were the folks who informed what I did. My father and my mother's father and her grandfather were all blacksmiths. And this came specifically and strategically from slavery. South Carolina is known, especially Charleston, for all of its metalwork. I'm talking fast because I feel that we don't have a lot of time, and I have so many things to tell you about myself. Yes, I'm egotistical, shut up. And so I started using the needle and thread. I tell you, during my student teaching, I realized that I would become a 700-pound alcoholic if I taught in public school system. So I, like any self-respecting hippie in 1970, went to Mexico with my friends. While I was there, I got a scholarship at the Instituto Allende in San Miguel Allende in Guanajuato. I never studied Spanish. I just got it off the street. So when you hear me talk, everything is grammatically screwy, loopy. Pero yo hablo español. I'm using my needle and my thread. I ended up going to many places in Central and South America. I went to Panama, to the Cuna, San Blas Islands off the coast of Panama, where the Cuna indigenous people, the second shortest people supposedly in the world, but that was many years ago. I'm sure that's changed. Did what we call mole work, but mole is the name of the blouse. It's also a way of doing applique. We call it reverse applique, because you stack the fabric on top of each other, and then you cut down layer by layer, stitching as you go until you get this radiating design. Well, when I went there, I showed them what I was doing and they laughed. They taught me a lot about how to traditionally use their form of stitching. Traveling is good. If you can get a scholarship to travel, if you win that award, that travel award, go. And I encourage you also sometimes to go to the places that haven't changed in 4,000 years. So I didn't go to Europe until late in my life. When I went to the San Blas Islands, which is a complex around 300 islands, some the size of the room you're in, some larger. Well, there was one that had a store in it, and I wanted to go buy traditional fabric. And I was there, and a young albino boy ran past me, and his face was covered with tar. Not tar, with what they kind of smoke, charcoal. Now, I'm an African-American roundaway girl from Baltimore, Sandtown. So that didn't look right to me. It's like, we got to get out of here. They got little kids and they blackfacing them and everything. I don't know. Then I remembered that I'd seen a mole, in fact, a series of molars that shows how they used the magic properties of young albino boys. They put them on the top of a roof. And when there was, what's it called, when the sun eats the moon, or you know what I'm talking about. They would shoot arrows at it to bring back an eclipse, to bring back the sun and the moon. And they would do this. They do art pieces with this stitchery. And I realized I was in the middle of what, a training series or something? I never would have even known about it or saw it in that way unless I was in that place at that time. So I wholly encourage you to go. Also, to get there, we were on a prop plane and they kept letting people in and off, and people came in with goats and chickens. Okay, next. I was a weaver for many years. I love weaving, except I hate warping looms. So I would warp everything, trees, you know, furniture. In fact, I used to teach classes. This is a way of making money for our Arts Council Artist in Residency program, where we go into the art classes, you know, those big old art tables that they used to have, flip them over, warp the bottom legs, strands. And then I and the kids, and sometimes my mom would come, and we would just weave large weavings. What I realized was I wanted to deal with light differently. I was, you know, a hippie, so I was dealing with translucency and clearness of thought. My kumbaya, my Lord. And the light either is absorbed or bounces off the surface of this. So in 1976, next, I went back to Haystack Mountain School of Craft. It was the bicentennial year. There were a lot of indigenous people there. And a young woman who I was either Cree or Cherokee taught me the peyote stitch. Now, I know a lot of you are getting really excited. Peyote, no. It's called a peyote stitch, not because you take peyote, although I'm sure a few people did. It's because the bulb of the peyote plant evidently has small dots that fall on a diagonal pattern. And the international name for the peyote stitch, because it's done all over the world, is diagonal weaving. You can see how old these are, 1976. My hair, I only have one chin, no wrinkles, and great tatas. Well, when I learned the peyote stitch, it was a release. It was freedom for me. Because before that, I'd either been weaving on the ubiquitous American Indian loom that you learn in the Girl Scouts or the Boys and Girls Club, or embroidering beads on fabric, because that's what my mom taught me to do. But here I only needed the needle, the thread, and the bead. And it allowed me to be as serpentine, soft, geometric, figurative as I wanted to be. And like anyone, in learning it, I tried everything and put everything, including the kitchen sink, in my artwork. I really was talking about themes back then still, but I realized next that every time I made something, I really didn't know how to do beadwork. So I took a lot of the extraneous materials out and just worked with needle, thread, and bead. I kept telling stories. The piece on what I hope is your left is called Chalk Lines. It's about this lady who found this dead girl on the street wearing her smiley face dress. The lady's holding her teddy bear, and the cops are drawing chalk lines around everything. The other one is called Spanish Saints, where I'm trying to be as experimental, making lines, you know, negative and positive space exist as I were drawing on paper. And I have images that are under glass of Spanish saints. Next. These are pieces that I'm doing right now for a traveling exhibition that will open next year. I am now a master and consummate beader. Now you're like this. Oh no, she didn't say that she's the master. And who does she think? Listen, folks. And I give this to you because I'm so glad it was given to me. I don't want to be an okay beater. I don't want to be one of the beaters. I don't want to be the rabble. I want to be the one. Why else am I on life? Why else am I working so hard? Is it to be okay? No. It's to make my artwork impervious to stupid criticism. It is so when people look at it, they're just in it. I want to be that artist. That shows me that I didn't spend over 50 years of working to be just okay. These belong to like my fairy tale graphic novel series. Excuse me. A lot of figurative stuff going. I'm playing with different color threads and with different beads because, you know, when you blend with beads, you're doing pointillism because it's dry, not wet. So I'm trying to bring in some subtlety by the use of thread and the use of different beads. Next. I love that jewelry is a conversation starter. And I love that I have insinuated the wearer into my, like, you know, schemes. Some of the artwork is like this. It's just very sculptural and beautiful, and people are drawn to the wearer because they want to know how the heck that was made. Next. But some of the work is like this, is sculptural, but it also tells stories. So there are figures in it. I was raised in a Pentecostal church as a kid. I even did street ministry where I sang. They got extra money because I was really cute. So when I went to graduate school in Mexico and the Day of the Dead existed, where death is just a transition, as in my church, not the end, and skeletons were everywhere, it allowed me to integrate that and the import of death and transition into a lot of my work. But not only do I do that because I want it to be figuratively there, I do that because it allows me to figure out how to artfully work on the technical parts of this necklace. I didn't want this necklace to have a closing. So how would I balance this big thing on the body? I'd have to work on the back, and I'd have to shape it to that part of your shoulder so that when you wear it, it stands on its own. Next. My mom told me that one of the most hurtful things for her was to be called the N-word by children that she'd raised from infancy. Now you have to remember, these kids aren't going out to the club, right? They're not listening to Jay-Z. Their parents are saying it. The very people that my mother takes care of every day. So I did a series, I'm going to tell you the real name of the series, called Nanny Now, Nigger Later, about how integral this woman is to the family. And no matter what, these sad, sad feelings are still harbored by her employer. Next. I believe in talking about the things that make me upset. I am a little crazy, but I'm not crazy in that way. Better out than in is how I feel. So I see stuff, and if it really makes me nutty, I make work about it. For a long time, around 6 countries in Africa, basically East Africa, maybe Mid and South, have been maiming and slaughtering African albinos. And some people say, and they use the word witch doctors because they're used in ceremony. So you can be coming home and waylaid on the side of the road and have your arms cut off, or someone will break into your house and take your infant. This is a flayed boy and his penis. It's the size of your hand, so you can really peruse it. One of the things I try to never do is let the quality of my craftsmanship be consumed by the content. I always want you to see how masterful I am in the making of the work. And I think that gives it more import when you're looking at it and understanding the concept or the theme. Next. I did a series called Day After Rape, and it's about the position, especially how women are sexually objectified during war. Now, because I'm an African American, people consider or think that I'm only going to do work about Africans, but that's not true. This woman is from Eastern Europe. During the war, she was raped. This is a guy who's doing the raping, as one would say. And there's the devil holding a red penis. Next. It's also a section of this Day After Rape series. It's part of Darfur. Women would run off to immigrant camps, but they'd have to go out in the daytime to look for water and wood. They would be waylaid, raped, sometimes killed, sometimes parts of them dispersed. Next. I think I have a wry sense of humor. You might know it too. I wonder if one day everybody's going to sit in each other's kitchens and talk trash and be able to look back on those days and say, remember when we... So this series is called Still Funny. And it started when a friend bought this Charleston shaker of a Black mammy in Charleston, South Carolina, I guess maybe 10 years ago. I don't really think, and I know they're still being sold. And you can still buy Blackie toothpaste in Japan. She was holding a rolling pin, but it really didn't look like a rolling pin. So the white penis became to represent all the young boys that she'd raised. And the other is about the sexual objectification of African-American men. So instead of this guy playing a flute, he's playing a Black penis. Next. This one is from another series that I've done. I think I still work on this, called Ancestry Progeny. You can't choose your grandparents and they can't choose you. So you are a combination, a culmination, a complication of all of that blending. So her legs and arms are made out of crockery that represent that French and English, but her face is obviously of a Black person. And that close-up is to show you how, once again, no matter whether I'm doing something this big or giant, I'm trying to be the best artist I can possibly be. Next. I've done a lot of work in glass. I've been in a lot of studios. I also don't believe that I also have to reinvent the wheel all the time. So if I'm working with a figure that I want to be an African figure, I will go to the kind of African work that's given or that's sold in trade. This is an Nkisi. An Nkisi is a power figure. You ask it for things, maybe it tells you things back. It brings great power to you and the environment in which it's in. We have Nkisis in the West. If you go to a Catholic church, you'll see Mary, and she's wearing a velvet dress, and sometimes people leave milagros or prayer cards or different tokens to them. She is, in fact, an Nkisi. That's what this is. I was in Prospect 2 in New Orleans in 2011. I got a residency at the Inferno Glass Studio, and we are dressing this Nkisi, which is done all over the world. You dress a power figure, as we might dress Mary. Glass work, we cast penises, fingers, and eyes, and then we also cast my beadwork into glass. Next. Sometimes I don't exactly know why I'm doing stuff. I just am drawn to do it. This is a very large piece of African sculpture called Shh. I realized that this was a way for me to really just add my African Americanness to an African sculpture, but also to push myself technically. So the dress is made out of large plastic. We call them pony beads, all yellow, translucent. But I wanted to make a story, so I took my yarns, the yarns that my mom taught me to sew with, that I used in my classes at MICA and in Mexico, in fact, around the world, and sewed different designs into these translucent beads. Next. When I told you that I really wanted to show my prowess and be good at what I do, I make really large wall hangings out of small beads. These are those small beads that your earrings are made out of. I was asked to do a show at Grounds for Sculpture, which is in New Jersey, I think around 5 years ago. The show that I did, which had 2 different galleries and an installation inside and 2 site-specific installations outside. This is a large wall piece. It's around 41 inches long. This is a Harriet piece. How in the daytime they're walking into the night. Next, I really thought I've got to do large wall hangings. I want people to walk up to it and go, oh my God, oh, damn. But also be mesmerized by the beauty of the work, because I think working with beauty is just as political as not. And also think, I wonder if I could do that. This is called Blue Baby Book. Next. My gallerist, Amy Raish, also said, Joyce, these are really, not only are they fairy tales, but the other name does graphic novels. Because I'd written a how-to beadwork a long time ago and, wrote stuff in it and did portraits and all kinds of stuff. And we realized that I was doing like a really weak graphic novel. So these beaded pieces this is around 41 inches long. I don't always know what the story means. I'm just overwhelmed. And let me say something about being overwhelmed. Do it. If it sounds stupid, do it. Now, I don't mean go walk on railroad tracks and drink acid and stuff. That's not what I mean. I mean, if it sounds like something that you don't know how to do or would look like it shouldn't work or what, try it. When I go to my studio, I try to leave as much as this ego. I don't know if you see that I am. And I'm also an uncertified multiple personality. So I don't even know who I'm leaving at the door, Sometimes I'm just little Joyce. I wouldn't go into my studio and play. And I do. I try to leave all of that out and just be consumed and submit, very important word, submit to the making. I give myself, even after doing artwork for over 50 years, tasks. If I'm using beads that are blue or a certain size, then I make myself not. If I'm only doing figures, then I'll do some abstract work. Next. I think it is of profound importance, I know it is for me, to always challenge yourself as an artist. If not, your work looks exactly the same. Now, sometimes you're doing things that are completely different, that bring you back to the very first point. But it's that travel, it's that walk, it's that quest that makes me, I won't talk about you, you have your own life. What do I know what you do? But that makes me a more vibrant and intelligent, yes, intelligent artist. I was given a residency in Murano, Italy, which used to be the glass center of the whole world. At the Baringo studio, I called him Bera Negro, Black Baringo. He said, sure, hey, why not? I'm like, well, do you read anything, any kind of American news articles when they're calling you Black Baringo? Why not? The second time I was there, I did a series of Buddhas, and they're like, I'm saying, you can't tell me what to do. I use Buddha because he's not a guy. He's enlightened. That's something that I'm working toward. Now, the first time I went, I took my beaded faces and things and told them that we're going to gather these into the bubble, and we're going to make things work. And they were like, no, that's not going to work. What? Well, sometimes they were right, because of some of my beads were not chemically compatible. And they got very huffy about that. So the second time I went, I bought old, sometimes ancient Italian seed beads that had been made in Italy. Their recipe for glass hasn't changed that much. They were chemically compatible. So when we blew and made this head, the white beads of Buddha's face adhered to the outside. They didn't pop or crack off. They didn't crack the glass. This is fall, I believe. Buddha is black and the clouds are blowing this glass figure. Next. This Buddha is a combination of spring and summer. I told my flame worker, that's the guys, I don't know if you've ever been to, a park or a festival where there's a guy with a flame making little baskets and dragons and things out of glass. Well, that's a flame or a lamp worker. He made me body parts and I set this figure on fire. On the inside of the body, and this is a large piece, is a hand that's grasping, and the face also has the face of Buddha. Next. Now this is Buddha that I believe is winter. A really large beaded face. Next. And you'll see that the figure is made out of clay beads. So she represents earth and they're in some kind of conversation. And when you see the leg, I told Baringo to go get me indelible pens. Well, a bit Kate, why you need that? Will you go, please? And when he came back, I started drawing on the leg. He came in, he said, I can't trust you, everything you're drawing on glass. Go for it, sounded stupid. Oh, I did it. Next. You can really see the red face on this Buddha. So it's different variegated colors of red and orange and black beads making the Buddha face. And a gold leaf boy, who's the boy, the younger edition of the man on the front. Now that is slowly rubbing off. That was my desire. Next. We're rolling in, folks. Another thing that was in the Prospect 2 exhibition in 2011 was this figure. She's lynching a tree. Those glass kind of prongs from her neck are branches that are, she's lynching it instead of it lynching her. That's all I know about it. It's around 11 feet long when you pull it out. Next. This is new work that I'm working on right now. This is another in the albino series. There's a woman going to market. She's got her son with her. She's dressed gloriously. And you can see the designs on her dress are not only from a bright colored bead, but the things that are tonally kind of more subtle are from me using blue and green thread into the yellow again. Next. But what she's carrying in her basket are the severed limbs, head, components of a small boy. Now, I had made these pieces in a while, but when I read that, the men who did it were on trial because that hadn't happened many times before. For the death of a small boy, I thought I'm going to do some work about it. I try to be as realistic and intense as I can when I'm working. Next. This is also a piece. That red monkey, who is a rascal, who's also a trickster, is the savior of these two children. The boy on his shoulder has been attacked. The other hasn't. And on the back are the names written in beads of some of the countries: Malawi, Burundi, South Africa. Next. Not all of my work is like, about tragic stuff. You saw my jewelry can be pretty. And this one is called Teapot Lady. The teapot on the top of her head was a finished teapot with a beaded base. When it got to the gallery, the base had been broken in transit. They sent it back. I couldn't figure out how to make it work, so I cut it out and I made a really big body. Next. That was around 31 inches tall. This is one of my first really large installations. And you can tell that it's an older piece because it's not that great, but it doesn't mean I won't try. This was at the Splendor Music Festival in Charleston, South Carolina. Next. My first retrospective was at the Baltimore Museum of Art in 2000. This is a waterfall dedicated to my mom on your left, made out of glass, and it pools. It flows and then it pools into flat cast pieces of antimony. Next. I was asked to do an installation in Baltimore, and they have all these grounds, and they kept talking about these trees they were going to cut down. They were going to cut them down because they didn't like the way they looked. They didn't think they smelled good. They would come into a neighborhood and take over. How dare they? And I said, sound familiar? I'm doing this because I want you to see my eye. Sound familiar? So I said, when you cut them down, give me some. My assistants and I tricked them up and we replanted them. We also did some trees covered in the festive colors of soda cans, because everything has the right to be exactly what it is. Next. We're coming to the end, y'all. You guys like this. Whew, that woman can talk. Remember when I told you, they told me to stop painting for the betterment of myself and the entire human race? Well, the closest I get to it is my printmaking. Because if I am a lousy painter, and I see lousy painting all the time being sold for a lot of money, I could probably start working on my retirement fund. I was standing in a supermarket, and one of those magazines, this is a long time ago because I don't go to the supermarket anymore, was open. I didn't open it. They took all the celluloid off of it, the celluloid, the plastic wrapping, and under it was one of those books about, like, you know, stripping and girls naked and that kind of thing. And there was this beautiful woman on the cover. So of course I opened it and I looked, and she was, I believe, Ethiopian and Haitian or Trinidadian. She was so gorgeous. So I'm thinking, okay, now this is the 21st century. She's obviously going to talk about how she's taken all of that money and using it to buy companies or land. And she said that she didn't want to get pregnant. And I thought, ouch. So when I was in Florida working in a residency for printing, I did this series called Sexecution. The bed on the right that she's lying in is in a prison where they strap you down and kill you with narcotics. And the eyes are coming from the people who are watching through the mirror. The eyes, the nose, the ears, the fingers, everything become eyes. And I'm not only speaking about watching this, but of how voyeuristic I believe we've really become. Now, I bet we were always voyeuristic, but now with technology, we can look at anything. Next. Well, here's the story that I love about this. This I made before Obama was elected as president. And I placed him with Saint Martin de Porres, Saint Martin of the Poor, who is a Spanish saint who's also African Spanish or African, because it could be Latin for all I know, meaning from Italy, but I think he's Spanish. He's the patron saint of criadas, of cleaners, you see there. He's the patron saint of the sick, so you see their hospital rooms in the back, and of animals. So I made this also with a VACP or a power symbol. That's what that clay piece is under Obama's nose. One of my art god kids who lives in San Francisco said, Joyce, and he sent me the article, you know that they're putting Obama's face on the votive candles of Saint Martin de Porres, making him a saint. He sent me one that I got, thank God, before the Catholic Church said, Obama not a saint, stop that. And they weren't allowed to sell them anymore. Next. I loved Obama for many reasons, with one, because you can make jokes about his ears. Here he is, Obama with Buddha's ears. I did him with Yoda's ears, Mickey Mouse ears. Next. I also am someone who I like hip hop music. It's much older than people think. It's 40 some years old now, it's almost 50. So I did 2 series. One is the patron saints of hip hop. That's what this is. And so this is Biggie with his wife, Faith Evans, and Lil Kim in the back. There's someone who's holding a marijuana leaf. He's holding a gun and he's on top of one of his cars. This is meant to be like Egyptian hieroglyphics, so it has some hieroglyphs. And it isn't meant to look like I had it cut, laser cut. It's meant to look like someone made it, drew a picture about it. Next. Okay, now we're getting into me being a performer. For over 10 years, I performed with Kayla Wall in the 80s. We went all around the United States, Scotland. We performed at the Fringe Festival in Scotland. We performed in Holland. We performed in Canada as the Thunder Thigh Review. I would be complaining about, what doesn't, some of these girls, why do I see their butts? Why don't I? And then I looked at one of those photographs of myself and I thought, oh, uh-oh. This was during the 80s when Kathy and Mo and Whoopi Goldberg were really working, doing monologues and doing 1-person and 2-person performances. And we wrote everything, wrote the music, we wrote everything. Next. Well, I haven't been able to work with my musical partner, the woman on the left, Lorraine Whittlesey. We're called Ebony and Irony, get it? Click, click. And I still, though, work with young artists. They might be doing spoken word. I'll be singing. I'll be jazzing it up while they're doing beatboxing. Next. Never stop, folks. Never stop. If it sounds really stupid and it's not like, killing yourself, maybe you ought to try it. Because I got the opportunity through Shota K, who is a beatbox artist. Now they call them breath artists. To work with this group from Russia who are throat singers, Alash, and those guys. We're doing an album, the album is out already, where we're making music, combining contemporary music, hip hop, my old blues, whatever, scatting, spoken word, breath arts, and traditional work. What can I say to you? I could have said, I don't think I'll work. I don't think that's for me. Or I jumped in. Next. There I am after working with Kayla Wall and other kind of theater groups, Honey Child Milk. I did for around 5 years, 1-person monologues and shows. They had various degrees of success. I wasn't the best, but that didn't mean that I wasn't out there trying. And my last show was called Walk a Mile in My Drawers. It was a musical. I did a CD that sold. And that's a picture of my mom, Elizabeth Caldwell Talford Scott, in her later years. The last 14 years of her life, she progressed with dementia. But I'll never forget what she and my godparents told me. And this is what I'm sharing with you, because I believe all of us have it. We probably just don't know how to really work it. My mom said, you have a light, a very, very bright light, a shining light. Don't hide it under a bushel. That's an old Southern thing. Don't hide your light under a bushel. And they had to, because of their ethnicity, because of their skin tone and whatever that meant, because their lack of academic education. Mom said, don't, so I won't. I'm going to use a word now, but I won't use it. They ate shite so I could have sugar. They ate crap so I could have sugar. So I'm not going to let my light be squelched. I shall not be denied. And so there's this song that I sing that I was taught as a child, and I bet you know it. This is what I'm going to end with. this little light of mine. Oh, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine. Oh, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine. Oh, gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Ooh, let it shine. Thank you.